So oftentimes you hear people talk about their plans for a data center design or their migration, or you hear the details about sort of the final product and how it worked and how it's amazing. But what we want to share with you guys today is a little bit about our process and how we got there. A little bit about some of the issues that we ran into, tips that we want to share with you guys, and just general knowledge that we feel we can transfer over to others who plan on going through this process or are going through this process right now. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
So I'm Andrew Schilling. I'm the Chief Infrastructure Officer at CannonDesign. I've been with the firm for about 5 years. I originally started back when CannonDesign was making its first big jump into virtualization, so I've lived through the pain through that and kind of used that to help mold the new infrastructure with Jimmy and some of the other digital practice folks.
And as Milan said, I'm Jimmy Rotella. I'm the Digital Practice Director. Our Digital Practice Group is essentially where design meets technology at CannonDesign. We're sort of that bridge in between those two worlds. Our designers oftentimes have trouble communicating to our IT folks how to do things or what they need or what they want. So our group is there to sort of help that translation, share new technologies, bring new tools to them, and experiment with stuff that will allow them to better their designs and better their process.
Quick glimpse at our firm. CannonDesign is an AEC firm that's architectural engineering and design-led construction. We're big A, little e, and even smaller C. We're about 1,000 employees firm-wide, 16 offices spread throughout the continental United States, the Middle East, and Asia. The big mantra for CannonDesign is SIFMO, which is single firm multi-office. That's SMO. And basically what that means is when we go to win a project or try to get some work, we want to offer the absolute best talent that we can. So I mean that's, we're working with people in Boston that may be on a project out of LA, New York City working on projects out of St. Louis. So that kind of sets the stage as to why we virtualize.
So I want to share a short video with you guys to sort of give you some insight into CannonDesign's sort of vision and process. Technology is integrated into our design process. And the video that I'll show you guys is other CannonDesign folks that are, most of them designers, talking about their design process, some of our culture at the firm. And what I want to sort of show as we go through the rest of this is how we took those same concepts and ideas and applied them to a data center design and migration, utilizing the same stuff that the rest of our firm is actually doing. Yes, that'll have to work for now.
So if you think about the definition of architectural projects, there's the technical, I need a new roof, my building's leaking. Then there's the adaptive ones where you say, oh, well, I want a combination chemistry, biology building. And there are examples of those, and those are challenging and they're fun. But probably the most exciting ones are sort of the transformative, where they can barely describe the project and define it, let alone there be a known solution set. So we dive in deeply with our clients and help them articulate their view. We evolve the program and the design together, usually arriving at a solution that just doesn't exist anywhere else.
One of our biggest strengths is that we're sort of wildly integrated, and we touch so many parts of what makes a city tick. In order to address education or health or work opportunities or civic buildings, in order to address any of those, we actually kind of need to know how the rest of them fit in, how the rest of all the fabric sort of works together. And it only benefits the work that we do. And for me personally, it's much more rewarding when we think about it in that much broader context.
Yeah, and I think we try and be as well-rounded designers as possible, because it helps us make connections between things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Like there's trends that are the same in corporate workplace as in education, and you can see some of those overlaps when you're in an integrated firm working on all different kinds of projects.
Our reputation, as clients are reminding me on a weekly basis, is for high design, and that's a double-edged thing. Sometimes it's more than they want, frankly. You're seen as kind of the urban architect, Some of the more rural or outlying locations, that can be kind of intimidating for them. But I see us as being very friendly, approachable, and perfect for community hospitals, because that's our legacy. A lot of our legacy clients are local, sort of Midwest, community-based hospitals, not the kind of higher design national players, which we are now also working with.
Part of the goal with whether we're working with the whole county or a nonprofit that's 5 people and needs a solution is the idea is you get, in a nutshell, our full attention and all of our services step by step, because you can't really properly address a challenge that someone has without doing all those steps.
I'm an architect. I've been here a little over a year, working in both the education and healthcare markets, doing some higher ed projects as well as an elementary school project, some master planning efforts. And I'm also very involved in sustainability at the firm. That's a big passion of mine, so it's something that I'm really looking forward to working with more closely as I continue working with Cannon.
The ultimate goal is to have everyone understand sustainability deep enough so that it's just a natural part of practice and how we do our work.
What Cannon is able to do in standing out is we're embracing change. We're entering or are part of an unbelievable technological change. I used to think it was just between the Wright brothers and NASA missions, but it's way more than that, and it's a big swing.
BIM is changing our world so much. We're only starting that, right? It's only changed the way we do our 2D drawings right now, but we're moving towards some of these models as deliverables and truly integrated modeling stuff. And to have that sort of knowledge represented in the leadership discussions as we start new projects has been really helpful, just to help the kind of people making the higher level decisions see what it takes to do those things.
We're at a unique time, and we're at this change in the what design technology means to organizations. And I think it's really important for everybody to sort of think outside the box and not be constrained to what most people envision a traditional architecture firm being. I think that the idea of what an architecture firm does is evolving rapidly, and I think that in the very near future we're going to be doing a lot of very different, very cool things than what most people think architecture firms do.
We like to say that it's our mission to solve the greatest challenges that face our clients and that face society. And that's no easy feat, but it is exactly where we find ourselves, that unique intersection where the complexity of opportunity needs to be met with a complexity of thought and a synergy of ideas.
So the reason I wanted to show that is because I think it sort of showcases how throughout our process of designing our data center, we followed a lot of the same things that we do for our clients. We were essentially, our firm was our clients. And a lot of those principles that that our organization has at its core, things like sustainability, things like innovation, things like living on that cutting edge of the rest of the industry, are things that we took into account as we were designing the data center. So in terms of this collaboration and these concepts that were really important to us, around 2008 we virtualized our entire environment, specifically for collaboration purposes. We wanted everybody to work together in that single firm multi-office concept. By 2013 we were fully virtualized, with every employee having access to a virtual workstation. And there was a bit of trial and error that we went through, some growing pains during that part of the process also. There were also changes in virtualization over those times. Our first machines utilized some of the early VSGA graphics settings that just did not cut it for the design loads that we were pushing for. So if you haven't seen our other presentation that we did earlier this week, yesterday, I recommend checking that out. That goes into a little bit more detail about how we got from deciding we need to do something to this is what we're going to do. includes some details about benchmarking, metrics and stuff like that, a couple cost comparison type things. So how many of you have heard of the technology adoption life cycle curve? So I think this is a really important thing to look at anytime you're implementing a technology or looking to make a drastic change in an environment. So this bell curve illustrates the amount of people or organizations that fall into each of these sort of categories of adoption. The majority of organizations fall into those the two middle areas, the early majority and the late majority. And those two groups are that's sort of the comfort zone. You're ahead of some people, but not necessarily all the way at the front of the line. We try to be in the first two areas, either innovators or early adopters. That area takes on a lot more risk, but it also gives you the potential to be a lot more prosperous. And one thing that we found when we started this was that having partners that you're working with very closely can make this percentage of risk a little bit lower. Something that you'll find when you're towards that front of the pack is that you oftentimes don't have peers to reach out to. Other people aren't doing these things yet. So partnering with your hardware and software providers are oftentimes the only way to get answers and work through things, because they may not have even figured stuff out yet either. They're sort of working along with you to problem solve and troubleshoot some of these things. A great example of this that I always like to bring up was one of the key benchmarks that we use to benchmark our systems is a tool called RFO Benchmark. And what we found when we started testing our VMs was that it wouldn't run on VMs. It just didn't recognize them. It wouldn't allow them to run. And after a few calls with NVIDIA and Autodesk, I was actually able to get the guy who developed the program on the phone and talk with him about making it work for virtual machines, which I thought was really cool, to be able to have that connection with people. And we would have never been able to do that without the partnerships that we developed through our hardware and software providers. So speaking of partnerships, if you're planning on going down this route, the best place to start are these NVIDIA guides developed by NVIDIA, VMware, and Autodesk. They put together essentially step-by-step instructions for getting your environment up and running. Now, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is some of the stuff that we found in addition to this, more like tweaks, but following these guides will get you up and running in your environment to get started. Just a quick note from our previous presentation, we definitely recommend testing all of your tools to make sure that things work for your organization. The benchmarks that we used to test were RFO Benchmark testing Revit specifically, which is our primary design tool, Cinebench testing your graphics and CPU capabilities. HoloMark also tests CPU and graphics, but specific to another design tool called Rhino that a lot of our high-end designers use. PCMark will give you a general PC performance rating, helpful to compare sort of apples to apples between machines, but take the data with a grain of salt. And then finally, our custom Taylor Swift test that basically was just, can you watch a YouTube video on your VM, which we found was a really important test to do. So check out our other presentation for more details on each of those, going into why we used each of them, how we used them, and then a little bit about putting together the qualitative and quantitative results that we found.
So using the deployment guides and all of Jimmy's benchmarks, we basically developed 3 profiles. The main goal of all 3 profiles was that anyone using any of these profiles would be able to use AutoCAD, Revit, Photoshop, InDesign at some level. Obviously, with the knowledge workers, they're not going to be doing it a ton, but for them to be able to pop in and not have to move between a different VDI instance is going to be huge. It saves everybody time. So that's kind of why they still have that lower end GPU, and like Jimmy said too, is we wanted everybody to be able to watch a 1080p video on their system. We do a lot of video training, as you know, since we're spread out across 16 offices. So I mean, it was important that we were able to match the business aspect with that on the IT side. The big thing that you'll notice is between our designers and our renderers is the amount of cores and a little bit of the GPU memory. We are heavily reliant on V-Ray, and for those unfamiliar with V-Ray, it's a CPU-based rendering tool. So the more cores you can kind of throw at it, the better it's going to render, the faster it's going to render. And then we also threw some more GPU memory onto those to kind of speed that up as well. We have about a 5% of our environment is based on knowledge workers, 90% is the designers, so that's really the meat on the bone for us, and then 5% is the renderers, and there are really high-end, I guess, clients for Jimmy and I. There's about 20 of them across the firm. The other big thing too that we found while benchmarking was flash storage. I'm sure everybody knows this. Everybody's got SSDs in their home PCs, their laptops. But for an enterprise, that was a big jump for us. You know, we were on the traditional spinning disk arrays. You know, we bit the bullet though. We wanted to make sure that every single VDI and every single primary production server was based on flash storage to give them, you know, that 5-6% increase on I/O time. Load balancing. This was something that we definitely learned on the fly. The biggest thing is, you know, per the profile breakdown, we can fit 16 knowledge workers on a B200 card with a M2, and we can M6 card, and we can fit 6 of our designers. We leave a little bit of room there so we can move them around on the similar thing, and then 2 renderers per workstation. Basically, we split the M6 in half. The big thing that we didn't know walking into this was VMware does not support vMotion. Unlike a traditional VMware environment, our VDIs can't move. There's no DRS. Basically, they have to be static. There's no direct API and says that, you know, hey, there's video open on this host. We can move you over. So what we had to do was a lot of load balancing by hand. So we needed to make sure that we were deploying the exact number of machines to the ESXi host. Let's see, the big thing too is when we went out to the data center, we came from your traditional, you rent a cage, you build your own racks in it, it's fantastic, but you're still in a shared floor space. So we partnered with Foresight Technologies, and those unfamiliar with kind of their new suite option, it's basically great. It's a data center within a data center. So we went out and we bought a 1,000 square foot suite inside the data center. CannonDesign is the only team that has access to that. We're in and out. Foresight can't roll in, and basically all of the partners of Foresight don't know who we are. We're totally unbadged. It's great. Offers a lot of anonymity. The great thing about that is we have a dedicated mechanical room. So we have, you know, dedicated UPSs, we have dedicated HVAC, you know, pretty much it's a small data center within a data center. The great thing too about the UCS is we were seeing such a greater density than what we've had before that we were able to change our cooling methodology. So we went with cabinets that had chimneys that allowed us to kind of run everything a little harder to push the heat up into the roof and not have to worry about cooling the entire suite. We still did do the traditional, you know, hot aisle, cold aisle, but this definitely kind of changed the design of our data center.
One thing in terms of the cooling aspect of it is oftentimes architecture firms will look at these sort of methods of external data centers as a means to get better accreditation in their actual office space, to get like higher LEED accreditation and stuff like that, because having PCs generates heat, uses power in your space. If those PCs and things are not in your office space, you can get higher points by that, but you're really just offloading that into a data center. But we've sort of went with that same mentality and said, look, well, let's try and make the data center also as efficient as we can and follow that same mentality.
When we kind of, you know, originally approached this, we were looking at, you know, both flex lab solutions and kind of the build your own solution. There were pluses and minuses to both platforms, but the one big deciding factor was when Grid 2.0 was out, there was very few qualified hardware vendors. The biggest one that came to us was Cisco. It checked all the boxes. It was going to give us the platform that we needed. Another big driver for us choosing a FlexPod solution is that we weren't going to have to worry about vendors bickering. It made it a lot easier, you know, to get on a support call. You could have all the parties involved. They would all work together. Solutions came a lot faster than, you know, Cisco saying, hey, talk to VMware, VMware saying, hey, talk to NVIDIA. You know, we were able to all jump on a call pretty fast and get stuff solved right away. Networks, everybody's favorite thing. You know, we can build a great data center, we can build great VDIs, but if that turns into, you know, poor translation on the end user side where they're not seeing, you know, good panning and orbiting in their models, it's really pointless. So the other thing we did too is we rebuilt our entire edge infrastructure. There was a total network refresh. We went out and ran dual provider redundant MPLS layer 3 circuits that fed right back into our data center. We established quality of service that pushed all the VDI stuff, phone stuff to the top of the path so that way it had enough bandwidth. And basically at the end of the day, our furthest office, which is in Vancouver, we're seeing about the average of 50 to 53 milliseconds of latency. It's not a huge issue with user experience. We've had people bounce around each offices, and they can't really tell a difference as far as the human eye is concerned. The internal edge office networks are about 1 gig. Inside the data center, it's at 10 gig. The other big thing too is we rolled out zero clients to help kind of offload any additional bandwidth. Host driver and patching. This is something that definitely got us. Double check your drivers. During our initial rollout, we were running into many other items and something fell through the crack. It was a bad ENIC driver. This was causing hosts to crash, VDIs to black screen. It was just plaguing us. We couldn't figure it out. It took us months of working with both support parties. We found out that we weren't running a certified Cisco ENIC. We switched it over. It was like a totally different system at that point in time. It alleviated huge pain points for us, and we saw better production. The great thing, if you're not experienced with NVIDIA GRID, is you do need your traditional NVIDIA driver. For us, we built it into the first clone. After that, we cloned it out. It was great. It was fantastic. When you go back and you update the VIB on your systems, you still need to push out that new driver. We rolled out an SCCM platform to do that. It's been fantastic. It allows us to update the entire system fairly easy. Zero versus thin client, we kind of touched on that on our presentation the other day. We worked with our HP partners. We got a huge variety of zero clients, thin clients, both laptops and desktop sides. Basically, what we wanted to do was a total refresh again of all of the edge infrastructure. So that was taking PCs away, the old, I think they were Dell Teradici clients, and basically just saying everybody's going to have a standard box, so if we have to go to support, it's going to be easy. So we rolled out about 600 of these clients across the firm. It was easy. It was fantastic. We did it through Teradici's management console. We basically deployed 600 in about 2 days.
So I can tell you from experience that designers are an odd bunch. I'm a designer. They're often very opinionated. Sometimes they're a little bit egotistical. But most importantly, talk to your end users throughout this process. They can oftentimes provide you with feedback and input that you're overlooking as you're developing these things. Sometimes, as you're looking at data, you're looking at metrics, you forget about the person who's sitting behind that computer all day, every day, doing what they do best. So talk with them, test things out with them. Get test environments where you have groups of people who you trust their feedback, who are somewhat flexible and will work with you to get these things to work. They also demand the best tools, and in order to do their best work, they need these tools that are really graphic intensive. That's why Grid lends itself well to this application. When we started developing our environment, we started from the beginning focusing on the designers. We wanted to make sure that the bulk of our users were going to get the best experience possible with the specific tools that they use. And we were also focusing on the ways that they work together. Now, I will give you a word of caution, though, in terms of physical versus virtual. In our environment, you have to make sure you keep your goals in perspective. We've been finding more and more that some of our highest tier renderers, some of our highest profiles are not necessarily cutting it for them. From a financial view, you're spending way more money on a server in the data center for someone who's working on a model that's completely detached. When our designers work on their renderings, oftentimes they're doing things locally on their machine anyways. There's not multiple people collaborating on a file. They have that local to their machine, and they're gonna do their thing with it. So for some of those cases, we've actually had instances where we're giving that person a physical machine to work on, and then instead of a very high profile, a renderer profile, we're actually just assigning them a designer profile that they can use on their high-end workstation. So it's sort of like a hybrid between the two environments. When they need to collaborate, they can. When they need the horsepower, they can do that also. That's one of the nice things about the flexibility of the environment. And physical connections are often the biggest issue that we run into. A lot of our users, again, especially our high-end renderers, they want to use all of the latest and greatest peripherals and gadgets, things like Wacom tablets, 3D mice, VR headsets, even some of the just high-end programmable mice. We've found that sometimes they don't just work. They're not plug and play like they would be on a physical machine. You have to hunt down drivers that work. Oftentimes you have to hunt down specific drivers to get them to work, where the newest one might not be the right one, and you actually have to go a few versions back, and it's tracking these things down to get the connections to work through the USB back to the data center. And then the transfers of large data. People rendering stuff out on a machine or creating something and saving it on a USB key, and then wanting to know why it takes a long time to copy their 5 gigs of data off of their USB key onto their machine when they're physically plugging it in. They don't really understand that concept that that data has to travel all the way back to the data center from that device that's sitting on their desk. So that's another thing that, that you have to keep in mind. Legacy devices also are an issue. Old versions of hardware oftentimes will just not work through this. And again, sometimes that we have to have physical machines around to get those things to still work for us.
It wasn't a huge factor for us, but one thing that we couldn't leverage out of the grid system was the CUDA cores. To borrow a term from Randall, they're noisy neighbors. They don't play well, you can't share them, so basically they're off unless you run it on a one-to-one system, which at that point becomes pretty expensive. As Jimmy mentioned, you're spending a ton amount to have one user on that system. Basically, we don't do a ton of IRA rendering, but if you are an architecture firm and you're looking to venture into the IRA, just word of caution that you definitely don't get that experience right out of the box. There are some things you can do to tweak it that we've done before, like Jimmy mentioned, physical workstations, or to segue into the next thing, a render farm. So our first kind of jump into Grid was with Grid 1.0 back when Dell was offering it with a WISE application appliance, and basically what that was a K1 card leveraged with a couple CPUs and a ton of memory. And basically, you could fit about 4 users on each one of those systems. We bought these as kind of a stopgap going from the old environment to the new environment, just to kind of have something to bleed our cutting-edge designers onto to continue to get them to work. And plus, it gave us good benchmarks and the ability to see what we were buying and what path we were kind of going down. The great thing is we were able to reuse these. There's 40 cores in each of these guys. There's the GPU leverage that we can do, and basically we built a render farm. So what this allowed us to do was what traditionally takes about an hour on a designer profile to renders out in about 10 minutes. We're slowly kind of rolling this out, and we'll continue to build it up, but it was great to be able to use the old grid with the new grid to kind of continue that partnership. Tweaks. If you guys aren't familiar with Revit, it's like Chrome. It loves memory. It'll eat it up. Autodesk gives you minimum, maximum specifications. Still not enough. What did you say it was? Like
It's 20 times.
20 times the size of the model, so you have a 500 meg model that blows up huge. And everybody's familiar with the way virtual machines work. They slowly eat up memory until they hit the max. So what we did is we started dedicating memory. So as soon as the VDI power is on, it grabs its 48 gigs. It's done. It's fantastic. We're not worried about ballooning or anything. The Revit model's open. That was something we learned on the old VDIs before we even jumped into Grid. We also set our latency to high on the CPU, which kind of saw some better rendering times and some better just overall usage. As we mentioned before, you can't vMotion VDIs across hosts. So if a host goes down, that user's kind of out of luck. It makes it difficult to work on the environment, do maintenance. You basically have to bring the entire environment down to do patching. To get around that, we did persona management. It's great. We lose a host, or somebody's VDI goes bad. We image out a new one. They log in. It pulls down all their stuff. It's great. It's fantastic. Layer that with the golden image. Instead of seeing your traditional 25 to 35 minutes of spinning something up, getting a user logged in, reconfigured, they're up and working in about 5 minutes now. It's great. It's fantastic. We even started leveraging it into our physical workstations that are racked in the data center as well. So they can hop between their systems and their desktops, documents, all those plugins, follow them around. So the reason why we built a new data center is our old data center was failing. It just wasn't cutting it. The technology was old. We didn't know what was in there. So we built a brand new data center and began migrating systems out of that. So the first thing we did is we deployed our UCS platform. We cloned out 900 VDIs in the course of about 2 days, built them into pools, started assigning users. It was great. The tough case was, how are we going to move 300 file servers without interrupting the business? We're going from Buffalo, New York to Chicago, Illinois. The way that we worked around that is we got a 10 gig connection between the data centers, and with our NetApp and our NetApp partners, we were basically snap mirroring all of this data between both data centers. So we'd bring something down, a section of the environment down on, say, a Friday night. We'd do the Delta snap mirrors and bring it back up Saturday morning. We did this over the course of 6 weekends. We didn't think it was going to go smooth. We thought it was going to be a nightmare. We thought we were going to be pulling our hair out. It went awesome. I think we had less than 1% of downtime total, hardly any negative user interaction. But the great fallback was that 10 gig circuit. If you missed our presentation yesterday, Revit does not like to span the WAN. It's terrible. It doesn't work. There's file locks. It just doesn't cut it. The great thing is that with that 10 gig pipe, if something didn't want to move over, we could leave it there, have the users on the new VDI, flow across that 10 gig pipe and continue to work as necessary. So basically, we were able to move the data center in complete transparency and nobody knew what was going on other than, oh, IT's taking a system down Friday night, but it'll be back up Saturday by the time I'm up again. So we've done this. We've been live for about 6 months now. So we're kind of in that, like, we just got out of a hole. We're above ground. So the system is running on 6.0. We have, future plans come in of summer to jump up to 7.1 to take advantage of Blast to give us, our users even better experience both inside the office and outside the office. We've also started playing around with 4K displays. Our users, everybody loves the dedicated monitor for Outlook. So, you have your Outlook, and then, these designers want more. They want 2 for Revit. They want 1 for Photoshop. So we're looking at 3 monitor solutions, how all that plays, if we're seeing any user experience loss or if we're seeing more pool on the system. We're also, too, looking heavily into getting a solution for our iRay users, whether that's going to be a rack physical workstation in the data center they're remote into, or if that's going to be something that sits under the desk. Questions?
Actually, it's a bit different in some ways. So, hi, I'm Pat Lee. I run Horizon Product Management. But this isn't even about the specifics. You guys are doing a great job. I loved the presentation yesterday and today. It's helpful to see how successful you've been. I'm curious, you mentioned things like Outlook. Are you guys having to expand like your collaboration options like to Skype and other things that come into play? Is that coming more and more in play in your office? Or is that less
so we
of an
actually
issue?
we're kind of, the next jaunt that I'm doing after the data center migration is kind of bolstering up a unified communication platform. So we've done the initial rollout of Skype for Business, the chat, the persistence with Outlook, but now we're going to jump into the telephony and the video conferencing and more of the AV stuff. So that'll be a huge factor.
I was just curious how collaboration was starting to come about. Since you've built such a great collaboration platform from the design side, how is that going to extend to the other parts of the business? So.
It's great. The biggest thing is, we've always had external access on our VDIs, even in the old data center. But for some odd reason, a switch was flipped in everybody's brain that when we went to this new data center, it was going to be easy to work from home. So Fridays in our offices are now a ghost town because 90% of the people are working from home. The double-edged sword to that, though, is we're getting more and more support calls of people not being in the office. Hey, I can't do this. Hey, I can't do that. How do I get my USB printer to print from home? But I mean, it's great. We really want people to take advantage of doing that. We have a ton of people travel. I would say about 30% of our firm is in continuous motion. Rarely do they carry laptops. They walk into an office, they plop down, sit in a queue, log right in. It's great.
You mentioned that you had to use QoS to optimize your VDI. Which tools and software did you use? How did you achieve that?
So I would have to probably refer you to our network engineer. He's Yuri Silkan, he's a CCIE, and basically he kind of went through and did a ton of trapping and basically established what is a QoS for us and what was the important traffic. One of the things that we noticed too was even with VDIs, we were still seeing a lot of SMB or SIF traffic coming that wasn't, and it was slowly starting to choke out the PCIP. So we've done a lot of playing with it as we've gone through and are continuously tuning it. But as far as to how he kind of arrived there, that I unfortunately can't answer.
You mentioned the roving profiles. Can you give specific examples, maybe the business case that drove that tweaks and how you address them?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The roaming profiles, you mentioned under the tweaks that were required. Could you give some specific examples, like what required those tweaks and how dynamic they were, and what were the business cases? Is it because the users were traveling, they're working from home?
So the roaming profiles is strictly in our VDI environment, and that was to offset the ability to vMotion VDIs to another host for maintenance. So for instance, if we have a host that has a hardware failure, those VDIs become trapped. We can't move them. I mean, they're basically dead. So what that allows us to do is to assign the user to an open VDI. As soon as they log in, their profile's pulled over. It's like they're on their same machine again. There was no business case of traveling or anything like that. It was strictly in the virtual environment as kind of a stopgap of, something has broken, your data is lost, you're going to be down for a while. It was just more of something that we could move people over quickly.
Hi guys, great presentation. I'm just curious as to, because this is a kind of philosophical change for a company, especially in A&E. I work in A&E as well. So I'm just wondering if it was a kind of drive from leadership, or you guys had to really sell it, and how that process went in terms of shifting over?
A lot of it goes back to, I would say it's leadership, because it goes back to that SIFMA or single firm multi-office concept. That was the core driving factor for virtualizing the environment, was allowing us to operate as a single entity. So that decision to go that route made us make specific technological decisions to help facilitate that and allow people to do that throughout the entire organization.
The other big thing is the majority of our offices, I don't know if you could tell from that video, are open spaces. The studios are huge, so people are working all over the place. We see them work on iPads on their VDIs, laptops. I mean, pretty much anything that we have that has a screen or projector has a PC. So I mean, that was the other big case of using a VDI and using a centralized method, was you can work anywhere that you want to work.
Hey, yeah, you mentioned that when they plug in USB drives, when you actually have to transfer the data across the WAN, you get performance problems. What about printing? Do you have problems when they go to print it, with it being problematic? I know that's an
Not
issue.
really. We have tons of printers spread across. I want to say we have close to 120 some odd large format and small scale printers. We develop print servers that we roll it out to. The VDI send it to it, and then it just comes straight back over the MPLS to those printers that run on a Fire or something else. Okay. Sometimes there's a little latency if they're getting in and they're drilling down into the advanced properties of the printer, because you're making those calls back and forth. But other than that, I mean, your simple narrow format black and white is as if you were sitting there. We do have dedicated print rooms in some of the offices. Those guys have physical workstations just because of the files and they're working on are so large that they may need some of that physical horsepower, just have the ability to do something quickly.
Okay, and then second question. You mentioned that you're looking at Skype and some other collaboration tools. What do you use for your phone system now? Is it a VoIP system, or is it a
So that is a little bit of a sore point. We're running on we're running on 2 different phone systems, which basically segregates the firm, but we're using older PBX and older SIP systems, but basically we're going to take those, push them to Skype's cloud PBX, and then call it a day.
Any further questions? Actually, I have one for myself. So on the peripherals, you mentioned how do you resolve the requirements for your users when they had more obscure kind of devices?
Oftentimes it's a lot of troubleshooting just from us at their desktop, trying to work it out and see if we can figure something out. Otherwise, we try to go that partnership route and reach out to the vendors that make those devices and try and find out if there's any known fixes for any of those.
So which ones did you get to work, let's say this way?
So we've done a bunch of different, like 3D mice.
We have, the designers like to use like gamer quality mice or keyboards, kind of whatever tickles their fancy. So a lot of that is kind of trial and error by patches reaching out. Logitech has been great working with us. SciTech has also worked with us, but I mean that's the kind of stuff that we see on a day-to-day basis. Obviously the Oculus, that stuff's not really going to work. We have one gentleman who has a 500 gig external hard drive, and he's willing to wait the time for that thing to load up on his VDI, and that's just the way he works.
We've had a couple Wacoms.
Yeah, we've had a couple Wacoms too. That was
but
the
only
big
specific models will work.
Yeah, that was one of the big things that when we jumped to both the newer Zero clients and to the newer version of Vue that we saw working almost immediately.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, one more question.
Have you tried the direct pass-through on any of the P cards, or are you just married to the M's? Like the actual grid cards?
We did some of the pass-through in the early just for benchmarking, but most of them are shared. So in our presentation yesterday, we kind of covered we do have physical rack workstations that use Quadro cards layered with the PCIP card that are then built into our Vue brokers that, as far as the end user thinks they're on a VDI. And that's what we push more of, that traditional, I need the horsepower, I need the CUDA cores, and that kind of stuff.
And when you're using roaming profiles, how are you managing the 15 minutes for somebody's profile to open the first time since they put crap on their desktop?
It's actually fairly fast. It's all handled on the back end by the NetApp. We use CIFS. We don't put it on a Windows server or SMB protocol. It's just right there on the NetApp itself. I think our average login time is maybe 2 to 3 minutes off of a fresh restart.
And how much crap do they have on their desktop?
Not a lot.
Okay.
That was another thing too. We got to do some awesome house cleaning when we migrated the data center. Is we're like, your old VDI is not coming with you. We've given you a 2 gig home folder, whatever you want, move in there, and that's kind of helped people maintain that. They think that they can only keep 2 gigs at a time, so that's helped us with the bloat.
If there are no further questions, thank you for that great talk.